first alert pinged just as lightning tore open the sky, turning my bright green backyard and the tall maple trees behind it into a strobe-lit jungle. I glanced at the camera feed and nearly choked. Karen, our HOA president, stood inside my storm shelter. Neon lime blazer, glitter sandals, bolt cutters swinging from her wrist like some deranged accessory. She spun in circles under the LED lights, gawking at the equipment like she'd trespassed into the Pentagon. Then the hatch slammed shut behind her, thunk hydraulics locking tight. 3 feet underground, no exit, storm sirens starting. She pounded on the steel door, screaming, "This is illegal." I exhaled once and whispered, "Karen, what have you done?" Karen didn't wait for storms to cause chaos, she made her own. 2 weeks before she got herself locked underground, she marched across my bright green lawn in a hot pink power suit, carrying a clipboard wrapped in holographic stickers like she thought it made her official. The wind rustled through the oak trees behind her, but she didn't care. She jabbed the clipboard at me like it was a weapon. "This thing violates HOA visual harmony," she snapped, pointing at a patch of grass so ordinary it could have been a golf course. The storm shelter was invisible beneath it. That was Karen in one sentence, loud, mismatched, and convinced the world needed her approval. Her motive came out just as fast. If I didn't authorize it, it shouldn't exist. She didn't know, or didn't want to know, that I was an aerospace systems engineer who had filed every permit, including the federal disaster mitigation grant that funded half the shelter. I said all this calmly, but she cut me off, snapping photos with a glitter-covered phone. "Don't get cute, Daniel. I will escalate." And she did. Every morning after that, her bright yellow HOA golf cart appeared near my fence line, squawking with rainbow decals and dangling tassels, Karen standing beside it like a guard dog in rhinestones, staring at that same patch of fake grass, plotting something she believed only she was allowed to: control. The first violation notice showed up the next morning, taped crookedly to my bright blue mailbox, flapping in the breeze like a taunt. "Unapproved structure. Visual nuisance." It read in all caps, printed on neon orange paper, that clashed perfectly with the deep green hedges lining my driveway. The second arrived that afternoon. Different color, electric purple this time, same accusation. By the end of the week, my mailbox looked like a tropical bird had exploded on it. Lawn height, grass color, suspicious ground disturbance near rear property line. Karen checked every box she could find. I didn't tear them down. I photographed each one, scanned them, and dropped them into a labeled folder on my computer. My engineer brain liked neat stacks of proof. Every evening, while the sun melted behind the tall trees, her bright yellow HOA golf cart cruised past my yard, rainbow decals flashing under the canopy of leaves. She'd slow down in front of my fence, pretend to look at some random shrub, then drive off like she'd accomplished something. It wasn't about grass, it was reconnaissance, and she was just getting warmed up. The day she finally crossed the line, I was working remotely from a cafe downtown, laptop open, iced coffee, sweating onto the table. My phone buzzed with a backyard camera alert, and I thumbed it open, expecting another drive-by. Instead, the feed showed Karen inside my fence. Her bright turquoise blazer practically glowed against the lush green lawn as she stepped delicately onto my fake grass, the maple branches overhead framing her like a bad commercial. Todd and Marlene lingered just outside the gate, huddled under a gaudy lime umbrella, whispering like kids who didn't want to get caught. Karen knelt right over the hatch, pressing the toe of her glitter sandal into the turf, as if she could feel the reinforced steel beneath. She ran a tape measure, snapped a dozen photos with her rhinestone phone case, and pointed down while lecturing her audience. From the cafe's cool shade, I watched her on my screen spoon, hovering over melted ice. Because I work from home most days, I see every stunt in real time. Cameras don't blink, neighbors do. Karen finally tested the hatch handle once, found it locked and stalked away, lips moving fast. She hadn't found enough. Yet, her next visit started with thunder. The sky had gone a strange bruised purple over our tree-lined street wind, brushing through the oaks like a warning. I was still at my desk finishing a report when the motion alert hit again. I expected another inspection. What I saw made my hand tighten on the mouse. Karen stood in my backyard in a neon orange rain poncho hood up the HOA golf cart parked crookedly by the curb like a highlighter on wheels. Todd and Marlene hovered near the gate, half hidden behind a cluster of flowering bushes, pretending to admire the landscaping. This time, Karen wasn't holding a clipboard. She was holding bolt cutters. They dangled from her wrist like some twisted charm bracelet as she stomped across my bright green grass toward the hatch. The wind whipped the poncho around her, flashes of color against the rich foliage. She didn't hesitate. She wedged the cutters under the emergency handle and cranked. The shelter was never meant to be forced from the outside. That's exactly why I designed the tamper system. In a real panic, someone could pop the hatch, dive in, and the system would auto-lock behind them. Safe, secure, sealed until reset from inside. On my screen, I watched the status panel flip, tamper-detected emergency access window open. Karen yanked the hatch up, beaming like she'd cracked some forbidden vault, and disappeared down the steps with her phone out filming. 30 seconds later, right on schedule, the hatch lowered itself with a heavy finality. Lockdown engaged. She had just turned my emergency system into a trap with herself as the test subject. I didn't sprint to the truck. I sat there for one long breath, listening to the distant rumble of thunder and the soft rustle of the trees outside my window, Karen's shrieking echoing from the shelter mic on my phone. Then I grabbed my keys. As I pulled out of the driveway, storm sirens began to wail, blending with the rustling leaves and the hum of sprinklers in front of pastel houses. By the time I circled the block and returned, Todd and Marlene were huddled on the sidewalk, their bright umbrellas clashing with the emerald lawns and flowering planters. They jumped when they saw me, then tried to look casual, like they'd just happened to be standing there while my HOA president locked herself underground. I walked to the disguised control panel by my tool shed, surrounded by tall shrubs and climbing ivy, and tapped into the live feed. Karen paced in circles under the LED lights, screaming about kidnapping and civil rights. My lawyer had told me years back to keep everything for the shelter in one neat packet, in case some idiot ever tests the system. Looks like today was audition day. I hit call. Sheriff's Department, the dispatcher said. I need to report unlawful entry into a federally subsidized storm shelter, I replied, voice steady. Intruder is currently locked inside. The rain arrived with the patrol cars. 2 sheriff's SUVs rolled up, red and blue lights washing over the bright lawns, the HOA's candy-colored houses, and the deep green of the trees that lined our street. The air smelled like wet grass and ozone. Neighbors peeked from porches and behind hanging ferns, phones already out. I met the deputies at the curb with a waterproof folder in hand. Permits, federal grant paperwork, installation receipts, diagrams, a clear trail that said, this is legal, this is protected, this is mine. The lead deputy, broad shoulders, shaved head expression, flat as bedrock, flipped through the documents, while the others listened to Karen shriek through the hatch speaker. She entered on her own, he asked. Cut through my lock, forced the emergency handle, ignored, posted warnings. I said, cameras have it all. He nodded once, slow, like each detail was another nail. Because you took federal mitigation funds, he said, this isn't just trespass. This is interference with protected emergency infrastructure. That was the line. The point where a gaudy HOA power trip turned into a criminal file. They moved to the hatch, rain dripping from their jackets, and began the manual override I'd built for tornado rescues, not for this. I'd already watched the system seal on my phone back at the desk. I didn't need to relive it. Now, I was watching something else, authority shifting away from her clipboards and neon blazers to people who actually had jurisdiction. When that door opened and she came out, there'd be no going back to fines and nasty emails. Only handcuffs, reports, and a storm she couldn't shout her way out of. The clubhouse had never been this packed. Usually it hosted bland potlucks and HOA craft nights, but tonight it pulsed with tension chairs, scraping voices, buzzing the scent of rain, still clinging to jackets. The big windows overlooked the bright green park trees, swaying gently in the post-storm breeze, but nobody cared about the scenery. All eyes were on the front table. Todd and Marlene sat frozen behind their pastel pink HOA banner, sweating under fluorescent lights. Between them sat an empty chair, marked President, a flashy, glitter-backed monstrosity Karen had custom-ordered to assert authority. Seeing it vacant now felt poetic. People weren't whispering accusations anymore, they were saying them loud. Why were our dues funding her inspections? She lied about Daniel's permits. My fence was legal, and she fined me anyway. Todd tried raising his hands. Everyone, please calm down. We're addressing unforeseen misunderstandings. A woman stood from the back. Misunderstanding. She broke into a federal shelter, wearing bolt cutters like jewelry. The room erupted. I stepped forward, folder under my arm, the air shifting as conversations died one by one. Todd saw me approach and visibly paled. He knew I wasn't here to speculate. I was here to prove. I set the thick folder on the table with a deliberate, heavy thud. Papers inside shifted like a loaded verdict. These, I said calmly, are the permits Karen claimed didn't exist. Signed by the county, approved by the state, co-funded by federal disaster mitigation. I handed copies to the front row. People leaned in, eyes widening. I continued laying out each piece like a prosecutor time-stamped security footage stills. Her neon poncho reflected in the hatch camera, the bolt cutters her, stepping into the shelter, the lockdown sequence, her rants piped through the speaker, gasps rippled as I passed around printed screenshots of her. HOA group messages, Karen bragging about taking down non-compliant neighbors, claiming she would shut Daniel's whole operation down, and even celebrating that no one would dare vote against her. Then came the final blow. Mrs. Pickens' tiny elderly cardigan, decorated with ceramic bird pins, stood up from the crowd, cane tapping against the tile. Her voice, though wobbly, cut cleaner than a blade. "I heard her plotting," she declared. "This wasn't an inspection. She said she'd find something illegal even if she had to make it up." The room inhaled sharply. Even Karen's loyalists shrank back their neon badge lanyards, suddenly embarrassing. Todd sank into his chair, hands trembling as realization washed through the room like a tide. This wasn't ignorance, this was premeditation. A man in the second row shot to his feet. I motioned to remove the entire HOA board, effective immediately. Before Todd could even open his mouth, someone else yelled, "I second hands," flew up. A sea of them, not hesitant, not conflicted, firm, ready. Todd sputtered, We need discussion protocol." But the vote had already swallowed him. Marlene's pastel yellow notebook slipped from her grip pages, fluttering to the floor like surrender flags. The motion passed by overwhelming majority. And just like that, the gaudy noise-making HOA monarchy collapsed in a single brutal wave of democracy. A soft applause started. Then it swelled. People who had been silent for years now clapped like they were reclaiming their land. Neighbors who'd been fined for mailbox colors and harmless garden gnomes were cheering like a victory parade. When the noise softened, someone called out, "Daniel, will you join the interim reform committee?" The room turned toward me, hopeful faces lit under bright lights framed by windows, showing the moon rising over lush trees outside. I raised a hand gently. "I'll help. But I'm not trying to run anything. I just want peace, transparency, and no more neon poncho law enforcement." Laughter broke the tension like sunlight. As people filed out into the cool night, the storm shelter incident no longer felt like chaos. It felt like a catalyst. Karen's reign hadn't just ended. It had unraveled publicly, spectacularly, and in the exact room where she once delivered fines and glittered binders. And for the first time, the neighborhood wasn't afraid. It was free. Rain clouds thinned into a silver haze as we all stepped out of the clubhouse together, the damp breeze carrying the smell of wet grass and jasmine from the line of trees bordering the park. The streetlights glowed against the slick pavement, reflecting in puddles that painted the road in neon streaks, pinks, greens, and yellows, from the discarded HOA signage people had tossed aside on their way out. For once, nobody hurried home. The community lingered shoulders, relaxing conversations, rising like warm air around us. It felt like the neighborhood was finally breathing again. Kids zipped between adults on scooters, laughing under the open canopy of tall maples. Older neighbors who usually kept to themselves drifted into small circles, talking freely, without that old nervous glance toward Karen's house. Even the decorative flower beds along the sidewalk looked brighter, their colors popping against the fresh rain, as if relieved the storm both literal and otherwise had passed. People kept coming up to me. A handshake, a grateful nod, a quick thank you for standing up. I didn't give speeches, didn't take credit. The truth sat quietly all around us. The real victory was that everyone had finally collectively stopped being afraid of a woman with glitter clipboards and neon golf carts. A community was rebuilding itself right there on the glowing rain-polished street. One man, someone who'd once been fined by Karen for planting sunflowers, patted my shoulder. "Feels different tonight, doesn't it? Like we got our land back." I nodded, watching the soft breeze ripple through the treetops. The night was calm, the air clean, the kind of peace that had been missing here for years. Behind us inside the clubhouse, Todd and Marlene were still packing their pastel binders, heads low, the weight of rejection heavy on their shoulders. They didn't try to defend themselves anymore. The vote was clear. The neighborhood had spoken. Their era, however gaudy and over-decorated, had ended. A cluster of neighbors gathered near me again, the glow of porch lights reflecting off the wet pavement. They talked excitedly about new rules, transparency, cutting back on absurd fines, letting people plant what they wanted, repaint what they wanted, live how they wanted. Someone mentioned the kids building birdhouses in the community garden without fear of unauthorized fixtures. Someone else joked that Karen would have fined the clouds for forming asymmetrically. Laughter spread easily. Real laughter, not the nervous kind. I listened, hands in my pockets, feeling a kind of stillness settle in my chest. The storm sirens had quieted. The shelter hatch at my property glowed faintly in the distance under a security light framed by trees and the lush grass still shimmering from the rainfall. Earlier tonight, that same hatch had trapped Karen in a place she tried to weaponize against me. Now it was just another quiet feature in a neighborhood, finally learning how to function without fear. A few people drifted toward me again, not to beg for leadership, not to unload problems, but simply to stand nearby. That told me everything about how far we'd come. Community wasn't built on rules. It was built on presence. My lawyer called briefly, just long enough to confirm that the sheriff's office and FEMA were processing charges, that everything was airtight, and that despite her attempts, Karen's situation was unraveling faster than she could spin it. But even that information didn't feel triumphant. It felt inevitable. When someone spends years weaponizing authority, the collapse writes itself. Someone from the newly formed interim committee came over to ask if I could advise on revising the bylaws. I said yes, not because I wanted power, but because I didn't want another neon poncho tyrant turning our gardens into battlegrounds. They smiled, relieved, and moved along to join others, discussing actual improvements instead of imaginary violations. The breeze shifted, carrying the clean scent of pine from the tall trees lining the street. Porch lights twinkled through leaves, moving gently overhead. The neighborhood, once rigid, stiff, smothered, now felt wide open, soft, almost alive. Conversations grew quieter, people drifting toward their homes with relaxed posture and easy faces. Eventually I walked toward my truck, steps slow, absorbing the scene. The storm had passed and the air shimmered with that rare sense of renewal you could almost taste. A couple of teenagers passed me, giggling as they pointed toward the new wooden sign someone had planted near my property line. Sharp carving, polished finish, humor, unmistakable. Unauthorized entry may result in a complimentary lock-in. The cartoon tornado chasing a frantic figure in oversized sunglasses sealed the message beautifully. I smiled, not out of revenge, but relief. For the first time, my land felt unquestioned. My shelter felt safe. My neighbors felt connected. And the sky above us, clearing into a deep navy dotted with stars, felt exactly like freedom. I paused at the edge of my yard, hand resting on the cool metal of the gate, and looked once more at the shelter lights glowing under the trees. Whatever storms come next, I thought, this time nobody is taking my peace.